Hello and welcome to the third part in my series, Heritage and Hope, A History of the Presbyterian Church in Florida. This part will cover from the 1940s to the present day. In the 1940s, after World War II, the GIs came home, and the world had changed. A couple of important things had happened in Florida and the nation. The GI Bill allowed soldiers to come back and pay their way through college. Homes. Everyone was wanting to have a home in the suburbs. It had quite a big change to the way things were in the U.S. But in Florida, one invention made the difference. This invention allowed people from up north to move to Florida and live here. Before the invention of the window unit air conditioner, Florida was a mosquito-infested swamp. It was very hard for anybody other than a native to live here. Northern people just can't take the heat, and without air conditioning, Florida would go back to swampland. Now, in the 1940s in our Presbyterian Church, we had a couple of things going on. The Faith and Life curriculum, enjoyed by many of us over the years, began in 1948. Also, you have notable Presbyterian efforts in the rebuilding of Europe by men such as Albert Kissling, who worked for 30 years in Jacksonville. Also helped rebuild the churches in Europe, and during the Civil Rights Movement was active in pursuing civil rights for Black Americans. The presbyteries, they saw a population boom. Churches were popping up all over. Everybody moved to the suburbs. You needed a new neighborhood church for all the new neighborhoods. In the 1950s, here we had some changes going on in our culture. The Civil Rights Movement was in full swing. In 1954, you have the landmark case, Brown versus the Board of Education. Well, in the PCUS, the southern branch of the Presbyterian Church, was the first church to endorse the Supreme Court ruling against segregation. In the 1950s, you have other movements for these things. You have a letter to Presbyterians rebuking McCarthyism. Also, in 1943, you have a letter Justice William O. Douglas cited when ruling against repression. You also have the very first Presbyterian minister ordained as a woman in the PCUSA, and the PCUSA and United PC of North America unite, not the PCUS. All right, in the 1950s, our membership exploded. 61,000 members, 176 churches. In Pinellas County alone, where I am, you have Trinity, St. Andrews in Dunedin, Christ Largo, St. Pete Covenant, Garden Crest, Lakeview Maximo, Medalon, Northwest, Pasadena, and Rio Vista. 56. Nationally, women can be ordained in the PCUSA. And the PCUS opens the Florida Presbyterian College, later to be known as ECKERD College. Now, one of the things about Florida is it soon became a retirement home state. People from up north could finally live here with the advent of air conditioning. Land was cheap and plentiful. And Florida has always been a low-tax state. So in the 1950s, many retirees started coming here, and you have the church meeting the need with the Florida Presbyterian homes. Other needs were also being met. You also started Meals on Wheels. Meals on Wheels in Jacksonville was one of my grandmother's favorite charities. She dedicated her time every week to bringing meals to shut-in elderly folks who otherwise might not get a meal. In the 1960s, Florida became important for the Kennedy Space Center. And, of course, the Civil Rights Movement was going on, and, of course, the Vietnam War. National events included the assassinations of Kennedy and Martin Luther King. But Presbyterians were also at work. John Glenn, a Presbyterian, was the first man to orbit the earth. Eugene Carson Blake, a Presbyterian minister, was speaking right next to Martin Luther King at the March on Washington. In 1964, Elder Hawkins moderated the General Assembly. First time a black man had done that. In 1960s, Eugene Carson Blake, clerk of the PCUSA, becomes the General Secretary of the World Council of Churches. And you have the adoption of the Confession of 1967. In the 1970s, we had a lot of national news. Nixon and the Watergate scandal, the Vietnam War was winding down, and Jimmy Carter became president. So what were Presbyterians doing? Well, Lois Stair, a woman, became moderator of the General Assembly. And in 1973, the PCA splits over the ordination of women. Also, you saw the beginning of the ministry of Fred Rogers, known and loved for Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He was a Presbyterian minister. And what we see in the 60s, the peak. 4.25 million Presbyterians in the U.S. Then you have Jack ECKERD. Jack ECKERD, a Presbyterian, made donations to the college that now bears his name. Also, entrepreneur. He had the ECKERD Drugs Pharmacy, ultimately now Rite Aid. And Ruth Eckerd Hall in St. Petersburg is known for his wife and donations to the arts. Let's see, he gave a donation, here it says, of $12.5 million to ECKERD College, at which point they decided to name the college after him. Presbyterians in the news in the 80s? Well, we had a few things going on. In 83, you had the reunification of the PCUS and the PCUSA. After the Civil War, it took this long for those over 100 years, 120 years, before those two could iron out the differences and reunite. In the 1990s, efforts by the Presbytery of Tampa Bay included mission work in Honduras. Ultimately, 13 churches in Honduras were recognized as the Presbytery of Honduras. That mission, of course, is still going on. First Presbyterian Church also has its missions. Some of our workers went down to Honduras. We do the free clinic and many other programs in our community, and no doubt churches all over the state are active in theirs. Bill Nelson, a Presbyterian, congressman and astronaut. The hot button issues of the 80s. Well, it actually was quite a bit before that, but abortion being one of those issues. But it kept, it didn't go anywhere. Debate still goes on today. But in 1647, the Westminster Catechism says, neglecting or withdrawing the lawful or necessary means of preservation of life, and whatsoever tends to the destruction of the life of any, is sinful. Further, it teaches that our Christian obligation includes protecting and defending the innocent. Today, our church website has come to a different conclusion. The considered decision of a woman to terminate a pregnancy can be a morally acceptable, though certainly not the only required decision. And it can be an act of faithfulness before God to intervene in the natural process of pregnancy and terminate it. These are the current statements as found on the PCUSA website. The issue being that women are capable of making their own moral decisions. Other issues at hand, ordination standards, marriage standards. It has recently been settled that the Presbyterian Church USA will conduct homosexual marriages and may ordain homosexual people. Other issues of theological importance: the idea of salvation without Jesus. Can someone who is not a Christian also be saved? This question comes up, and the answer is not certain at this time. What is certain? Our peak, 4.25 million Presbyterians in the United States, has dropped. It has dropped quite a bit in that time. Our trends, our trend line now, going from 2005 at about 2.35 million Presbyterians, has dipped below 1.5 million by 2018. This trend line, if it continues, is going to hit zero in 2035. Now, we can see a few things. The decision by the presbyteries to have full inclusion of all people, regardless of sexual orientation, was done in 2014. There is no sharp drop from 2014. It is the same line. The decision of supporting a woman's right to choose was back in the 60s. Ordination of women was in the 40s. These issues are not our problem. These things have happened, but they have not been the cause of these drop in membership. So what are we going to do differently? COVID-19 gives us a new challenge and new opportunity. While we may be watching church online, making conference calls, making videos for the internet, bringing our bands out on the street, or putting up more signs, whatever the future brings, it's not going to be the same as it always was. Then again, it never was. From the church's start, early before people came to Florida, when we only had less than 1,000 members in our denomination in the state, 10 times more seats than people, that back then was optimism. We had those seats and we wanted to fill them. And today's challenge is much the same. We have empty seats and we'd like to all be together. The current pandemic means that may not be possible, and we may have to think of new ways to reach out. But what is the future going to be? Is it going to be like the revival, where they claim backsliders were reclaimed, hard hearts softened, and sinners awakened? Or are we going to conclude, there is no Holy Ghost here, brethren? Folks, hopefully we can trust in God. He will prevail, and we will see growth again in a new way. Thank you.